The ancient Egyptians were preoccupied with the fear of death and the problem of how best to get to the other side. There was never an ancient people who believed more strongly than the Egyptians that death is not the last act of man and that dying is not death. In the cosmology of the early Egyptians, humans were considered children of the gods, which meant that they inherited many other elements from their divine ancestors in addition to the physical body. The Ba or spirit was depicted on the walls of tombs as a bird with a human head leaving the body at the time of death. Ba was an abstract entity associated with breath during a person's lifetime. Apart from Ba, each person has a sort of ghostly double that was given to each person at birth. As long as people controlled themselves, they survived. But as soon as he died, he began a separate existence which still resembled the body on which he had previously lived and which still required food for sustenance. Each individual also had a ran or name that could attain a separate existence and was at one time the underlying substance of the integral aspects of all. Other aspects include Khu or intellect, Ab or heart, Sekem or life force, Khaibet or shadow, Ek or glorified soul, and Sahu or mummy. But the most important of all these aspects of man was Ka, who became the center of the cult of the dead because all offerings of food and material wealth were made to Ka. The priests who were appointed to carry offerings to dead were called servants of Ka. After an Egyptian's death, however, the body became inert and no longer capable of movement, and the body did not decay. So the greatest care was taken to preserve it as the center of individual soul expression. The body was carefully embalmed and mummified and placed aside in a coffin as if it were still sleeping. In the tomb with the mummy were brought all the utensils that a living person might need on a long journey, including toilet items, vessels for water and food, and weapons and hunting equipment to protect against robbers and initial supplies. After it was over, food was provided based on their writings related to their concepts of goodness, purity, faithfulness, truth, and justice. Starting with the pyramid texts and moving forward, most scholars agree that the ancient Egyptians were highly moral people. The gods Osiris and Isis were revealed as the ideal father and mother and Set become a symbol of evil. During the Middle Kingdom, the story of Osiris became a kind of gospel of righteousness and justice was exalted in a way that has been found in few periods of history. The 18th dynasty began around 1580 BC. It took place in much of the religious literature of ancient Egypt, including the pyramid texts. The world's oldest extant funerary literature dates back to the 4th millennium BC, and certain modified versions of those texts, called the coffin texts, were brought together, re-edited and combined and painted on sarcophagi and written on papyrus. This vast literary effort of many authors and compilers is now known as the Book of the Dead. Its creators called it a chapter of moving forward day by day. Although several known copies of this ancient work exist, no copy contains of the chapters, which are thought to number around 200. The theme of each chapter is the beatification of the dead, but the chapters are as independent from each other as the Old Testament Psalms. One of the most curious aspects of the Egyptian Book of the Dead is that although the work is full of realistic and graphic scenes of preparing the deceased of mummification, there are no paintings depicting death and dying. Obsessed with the mortuary and funerary aspects of death, the Egyptians rarely dealt with the actual ways in which people lost their lives. Some scholars have observed that it was not that the ancient Egyptians wanted to avoid the unpleasant subject of death and dying. Rather, it was that he never formulated any clear concept of the nature of death or its cause. By the time of text of the Book of the Dead was being copied onto rolls of papyrus and placed in the tombs of the dead, a great social and religious revolution had already taken place. Whereas the pyramid texts were to be inscribed only on the coffins of royalty, it was now decided that anyone who could afford the ritual would be entitled to follow the god Osiris after death. The cult of Osiris was now expanded so that any deceased human commoner or nobleman of means could become Osiris. The most important ceremony associated with the preparation of the dead was the opening of the eyes, mouth, years and nose of the deceased. It was believed that this right guaranteed life of the body and made it possible of the bard to re-enter its former adobe. If the budget of the deceased permitted, it was also customary to bring into the tomb several small figures called as batu. When the buried man stood before Osiris and the 42 divine judges, his duty was to speak and testify of character. The Book of the Dead also contained some sacred spells designed to free Ka from the grave and allow him to be reborn. The soul may experience existence as a falcon, a heron or a plant such as a lotus or lily, moving through various manifestations of the life force until after 3000 years it once again takes the form of human being. I cannot take rebirth. The Egyptians called Osiris the god of lords, king of kings, and god of gods. Scholar EAW, according to Birch, Osiris was a godman who suffered and died and rose again and reigned for all eternity in heaven. They believed that they would inherit eternal life just as he had. Ancient myths proclaim that Osiris rose to fame first as a peaceful leader of a high culture in the eastern delta, then as a powerful ruler over the entire delta, a veritable master of the Nile and its vegetation, growth, life, and culture. As a deity, he was the husband of Isis, the goddess of magic and sorcery, the father of the great war god Horus, and ultimately the conqueror of northern Upper Egypt with its principal city Abydos. Then he had a dispute with Set, who killed him and cut him into pieces. The black mist of death did not destroy Osiris. In fact, quite the contrary. For Isis, the incarnation of the divine mother goddess, used her magic to bring her back together. Osiris rose from the dead and became the god of resurrection for all his followers. The cult of Osiris was established at Abydos, where he became known as the god of death or lord of the west, referring to his mastery over all those who travelled west at the sunset of death. The theology of Osiris, which promised resurrection, soon overshadowed that of the sun god Ra and became the dominant feature of all Egyptian religion. The theology of Osiris, which promised resurrection, soon came to dominate the theology of the sun god Ra and became the dominant feature of all Egyptian religion. Ra was originally a creator god, a solar king by nature, whose theology was concerned with the world, its origin, creation, and the laws governing it. Osiris and his doctrines were concerned with the problems of life, death, resurrection, and the afterlife. The connection between the two gods was Horus, who was the sky god of heaven and also the dutiful son and successor of Osiris. The general influence of Ra and Osiris can be traced from the time of the pyramid texts to the fall of Egyptian religious history. The cosmology of Osiris can be divided into two periods. The former extended to the time of the pyramid texts, during which he was a peaceful political power, administrator of high culture, unifying factor in bringing the Delta and northern Upper Egypt into one region, ideal husband and father and beyond. His death is the god of resurrection. The sound period extends from the time of the pyramid texts to the common era when he was primarily the god of the dead and king of the underworld. When an ancient Egyptian died, the deceased was accepted to appear before Osiris, who would sit on his throne and wait to pass judgment on him or her. The deceased was led by the jackal-headed god Anubis, followed by the goddess Isis, the divine sorceress representing life, and the goddess of the underworld, Nephthys, who represent death. The ancient Egyptians believed that this was the natural order of things. He had no doubts about immortality. A blessed rebirth was certain in their cosmology. So guys, that's all. Now you know what to do. Just comment on this trusted comment section. Till then, goodbye and take care.